Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's Napa Perkins from Electra Astrology. We are diving deeper into Aquarius, and there's a lot of Aquarius energy in the sky right now. So we are grappling with these themes in a really personal way. This is what I like to call the shadow episode, where we are diving into the things about Aquarius that can be difficult, that can go wrong. Anytime that we're talking about Aquarius, we are talking about the collective, the people, the groups, the government. This is a Saturn ruled sign. The modern ruler, of course, is Aquarius. But if you just think about Saturn and Aquarius, Saturn is the government. It's the rules and regulations, it's the traditions. And Uranus is where we have to shake things up and breathe a fresh new life into things while still understanding that we're part of a group or part of a collective, and that in order for us as a collective to function really smoothly, there are agreements that we all must make to follow laws. Technically, we don't have to stop for a red light, but we must, because otherwise it would be chaos and anarchy. So we're going to dive into that today. And this is always one of my favorite episodes of all of the archetypes, the shadow episode. But there is something that's really potent about this Aquarian episode. As I record this in 2025, we're going to have Pluto in Aquarius for the next 20 years. Regardless of when you listen to this, you're going to be dealing with these themes in a pretty big way. So these are episodes from season 5 that I originally released on my podcast, Star Narratives. They are edited and being re-released on YouTube so that they are a cohesive body of work. I'm going through all of the archetypes in great detail. I'm also currently going through the asteroids. So these are great. These are a way to learn astrology, but more importantly, they're a way to deepen into knowing yourself, seeing yourself more clearly, seeing what drives you and what drives the other people, especially in Aquarius season, what is driving the collective. Because the more that we understand, the less we're on autopilot. And I believe that autopilot is what has gotten all of us to this place where everybody is wringing their hands and saying something has to give. And, that's pretty typical of the energy of Aquarius, is like something needs to change. This isn't working. So all of the places in your own personal life that aren't working, where it has become stagnant, or you are too hooked on the way that things have always been, and knowing that there needs to be something that's different, some sort of revolution. And that is also what we're seeing in the outer world as well. And that is all under the umbrella of Aquarius. So make sure to catch my asteroid series, which is also being released on YouTube every Sunday, going through all of the asteroids, which are fascinating. And on Monday, I release The Path Ahead, which is the astrology forecast. So there's a lot of good content. If you want my free Astrology is a Superpower ebook, you can get that by following the link below. You can also go to my website, electraastrology.com, if you want to work with me or book a reading. So I'm going to be diving into the themes of conformity and rebellion later. But this is a really good time in history, in your life, to be really examining the way that you are relating to the collective. As I'm recording this, we've just had a new presidential administration come on board. A lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it, but we're also doing this dance of how can we be in a collective? How can we create a system that runs smoothly when people are at odds with one another, when things are happening that some people love and that some people hate? And it's interesting when we bring in this idea of conformity, of wanting to go along with the crowd, being a part of the group, being on the right side. And that can even morph into being popular, going with the flow, making yourself look good, right? There's always a power in belonging. And we are pack animals and we wish to belong. But then we also have these moments where we realize we don't agree and we want to fight back, and we find ourselves at odds or on the outs. We don't want to cooperate. We see that change needs to be made. We want to innovate. And I would say that we have all landed on both sides of the spectrum through the course of our lives. So you can think about a time when you knew that you were in with the right group. You were surrounded by the right people. You all agreed with one another. You fit really well together. And then think about the people that were on the outside of that group. And this could have been people that were in opposition to you, or this could have just been, as we say, like the nerds, the geeks. And then think about a time when you were on the outside, when you realized, I don't agree. I don't want to be here. I don't trust the group, and I'm kind of a nerd. I'm kind of an outsider. And, I think that both sides have a lot of merit and that we can learn a lot from both sides. But one of the things that we're going to be asked to do with Pluto in Aquarius is really look at the nature of our own personal tendency to conform. And this can also show up as a stress response of the fawn. And that is the version of you that wants to make sure that everybody else is happy, wants to make sure that you're good, that things are smooth, that you're accepted. And sometimes we can bring a little bit of that fawning energy into our conformity, right? I just want to fit in. I just want to be on the right side of things. I want to be in agreement with the popular vote or with the popular consensus. And then we look at that rebel within us, and we know that that's where we tend to go into more of a fight response, where it's like the middle finger shooting the bird, like, hey, I don't even care. I don't even want to be a part of this. Screw you. This isn't for me. And so think about for you, just in general, when it comes to your stress response. And we also have the flight and the freeze response. And we could even say that the freeze response can go along with conformity, right? I don't know what to do. I don't want to be rejected. I'm just going to go along with the group. Or the flight response, which is another version of I'm out of here. Screw you guys. See ya. So we're looking at some stress responses this week as we're going through this Aquarius. And let's be honest, 2025 astrology is wild. So we're going to be facing our stress responses one way or the other. So I encourage you this week to get a sense. What is my typical stress response? Especially the month of January alone, which is when I'm recording this of 2025, it has felt like such a roller coaster. There have been so many different things that have happened, and it is bringing all of us on this roller coaster ride of where do I belong? What do I believe? How do I fit in? And so the more that we're examining this within ourselves, the more that we're introspecting, the stronger our center is going to be. And we're going to need a really strong center moving into 2025, not because we're about to fall off the cliff, but we are feeling into our power. We are looking at everything that we have learned, everything that's transpired, especially since 2020. It's time to acknowledge where you've come from and where you are now, and of course, where you're going, because the nodes just shifted in the sky. We are all on a new 18-year destiny path. If you're listening to this in the future, think back to early 2025 and you can track your new destiny changes. They will be more obvious for you if you're listening to this in the future because things will have unfolded. So before we jump into the teaching, just take a deep breath and just allow all of that to land. These are big subject matters that none of us can get away from because we are all in groups, neighborhoods, families, schools, workplaces. We're all connected in some way to the World Wide Web. So we are all interacting with humans all the time and can't get away from it. And so figuring out what is your version of going with the flow right now, and what is your version of rebelling right now? All right, let's jump into the teaching. We have talked about many of the facets of Aquarius. We started off looking at the transition between Capricorn tradition into Aquarius revolution. We moved into Leo versus Aquarius, that comparing and contrasting between who you are and who you become when you are surrounded by people in the community. Last week, we talked about working with the pack, how to navigate humans, those people that are always here in the background of our lives. This week, we address one of my favorite parts of this Aquarius archetype, which is about the rebel. Of course, with rebellion must also come conformity. So let's talk about being on the edge. We'll start there. Think about all of the demographics in your life, in your generation, that were considered edgy, that were counterculture, or that went against the norm. I know in my generation that if you were a goth, you were wearing black clothes, you were wearing black eyeliner, you were different. If you were a punk, you were different. You were super gluing your hair into mohawks, you were putting safety pins through your lip. And when you think about the places in your own life where you are counterculture, or you have held an opinion, or you've done something differently than the group, that is Aquarius. When I was born back in the 70s, hippies were people that were different. And when I look up hippie in the dictionary, it's an interesting definition. It's a person of unconventional appearance associated with a subculture involving a rejection of conventional values. And honestly, if that doesn't describe Aquarius, I don't know what does. We need that. We need people that are revolutionary, that are unique, that are pushing the boundaries of the status quo. Because if we don't have that, then we end up eventually feeling like we are in a cage. We end up feeling very constricted. If we're all doing the same thing, eating the same foods, thinking the same thoughts, eventually we hit a wall where we need freedom. And that is where we start to see people out on the edge. This is people being different, people being progressive. Aquarius is also connected to humanitarianism, wanting to be different in order to bring something better in. So think about the places in your own life where you've been different, haven't thought the same way, you haven't looked the same way, and you are breaking the molds of the old guard, so to speak. And think about what that felt like to be different and to be unique, to test yourself, because when we are different, we are agents of change. We are mistrustful of the status quo, and for good reason. And we also risk being ostracized. So let's talk about conformity. We hear that word conformity and we think, oh God, that's awful, or at least I do. But conformity doesn't mean that you're just a sheep rolling around doing what everybody else does. Because Aquarius rules groups and people of like mind, friendships, colleagues, we have times in our life where we have gone with the crowd. And that's because we respected what the crowd was doing. We believed in it. We liked the people in the crowd. We wanted to fit in. So we look at that under the umbrella of conformity and we say, I'm willing to be like you. I'm willing to follow these rules. I'm willing to do this thing because there's some reason that I believe in it, or there's some reason that it benefits me. So think about those places in your life where you have felt like you were really a part of something and you knew that you were on the inside of the fence, and it's safe on the inside of the fence. Everybody else is in there too. Everybody else has a like mind, and we are all going for the same thing. Aquarius rules social causes and ideals. Sometimes those social causes feel like they're the right things, and we're all in agreement. Yes. And then we reach that point where eventually we look around and we say, I'm tired of this. I feel like I need to do it differently. I feel constricted. I'm in a cage. And then we start to rebel against those ideas, or we start to shun those ideas. Then once again, we are on the outside. And if we have new progressive ideas, which most of us do when we disagree with something, then we again become the rebel. We become the revolutionary, and we are in the minority. So we're playing around with this whole idea of, am I in the group? Am I outside of the group? Am I on the island? Am I being kicked off of the island? And we know that this is really tricky territory. Both sides have their pros and both sides have their cons. And it depends on where you feel the most comfortable. Where would you most like to be? So when we look at being in the group, let's start there. There are always going to be little places where you're realizing that you have to sell yourself out to fit in, even when your intuition says no. So in those times in your own life where you had to fit in, where you just went along with the group, and I always think about adolescence, the popular group or the group of friends that you were in. What were the requirements for being in those groups? What was it that you had to do? How did you have to show up in order to be accepted? Sometimes that looks like gossiping about other people, throwing other people under the bus. Sometimes it looks like being beautiful and appealing in order to fit into a group, having enough money, saying the right things, having the right viewpoints. Eventually, those groups become cages. So when you think about the idea of a cage, and let's just look at your current cages. What are some of your current cages? What do you get stuck in a desire to fit in? Where do you silence yourself so that you are not ostracized and you are not shunned? What topics do you avoid talking about with your circles because you know that you don't necessarily share the same viewpoint? And just think about that for a minute. Where do you keep quiet in order to seek acceptance? Now, let's take a look at the other side of that, which is how other people expect us to be in order to fit in. So I want to talk a little bit about cancel culture for a minute. When we were going through 2020, 2021, especially, we were facing a lot of cancel culture energy. The planet Neptune was at the same degrees in the sign of Pisces that it was in when we had the witch hunts. History does repeat itself, and we look at astrology for where the planets were, and we clearly see that not only does history repeat itself, it will repeat itself when we have repetitious astrological alignments. So, cancel culture. What did we see about cancel culture back a few years ago? It's still happening. It's not nearly as bad as it was. If you did not prescribe to the exact idea, if you did not do things the way that the mainstream wanted you to do them, you got quote unquote canceled. That meant that you were kicked out of the group, publicly humiliated, shamed. It was made clear that you were wrong, that you were on the outs. And just think about all of these different groups and businesses and whatnot that were quote unquote canceled. And think about the times in your own life when you've been canceled. It probably was on a lesser scale. Maybe you got kicked out of some social group. I remember in sixth grade, we kicked a girl out of our clique. I don't remember why. I'm sure that was terribly painful for her. And I'm sorry if you're listening to this podcast. But imagine the power of the group. The power of the group to say, this is what we will accept and what we will not accept. And if you are not with us, you are against us and you're out. Now, sometimes that's great. We need to clean house. And sometimes that's not so great because we end up shutting down thought leaders. We end up closing our ranks against people that see ways to do it better. None of these archetypal energies are black and white. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. And when we are dealing with a collective of people, as Bob Marley says, you can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And isn't that true? We can get some people to agree on some things, but we cannot get everybody to agree on everything, and certainly not all the time. This Aquarius energy can be really gray. It can be hard to know what is right and what is wrong and where we stand because we look at all these elements. Is this right for me? Yes. But is it right for him? No. Do I agree with that person? Yes. But do I agree with that whole group? No. Is this going to improve their lives? Yes. Will it improve their lives? No. Anytime that we're looking at a collective, we want to remember that there's so much nuance. And because Uranus, which is the planet that rules Aquarius, is an outer planet, the outer planets rule the subconscious. The outer planets are also farther out in the galaxy. They are hypothetically closer to the divine. There's a lot around dealing with groups of people that you have to tune into your guidance about. If you're using too much of your mind, too much of your own ideas, your own stances, your own morals, your own values, then you end up really losing touch with how to serve a collective, how to serve people. So think now about being on the outside and the times when you've been the one that's advocating for change. Maybe you're being disruptive about it, and maybe you're being canceled. Maybe you're being bullied, being ostracized. and the pain that goes along with that, but also the power of standing true for something that you believe to be better, the power of knowing on some level you're trying to improve circumstances for people. And a question for you is, which side do you tend to be more comfortable on? The one that is on the outs advocating for change, or the one that's on the inside feeling like you're part of the group? These are all really important things to think about. These are good questions to be asking yourself as Pluto is moving into Aquarius, where all of these themes become very front and center in a new way. Remember that one of the things that we're always trying to do with Aquarius is we're trying to individuate relative to our social training. There are ways that that individuation becomes really critical to your sanity. And in order to individuate, you have to have a sense of who you are. That's the sun, that's Leo, and who you are in society. That's what we've been talking about the last few weeks. Getting a handle on how you relate to society, how people relate to you, how you respond to the people around you, where you are the most comfortable, what side of the fence you usually find yourself on. The more of a self-understanding, a body of self-understanding that you have, the easier this work becomes. All right, so just take a deep breath. See how this information is landing with you. If there are any memories that it is evoking or old stories that are rising into your consciousness about group dynamics, know that those things are here to help you understand this theme in your own life. When we're talking about Aquarius, we have to look at this idea that Aquarius is about emotional distance. We have to hold things at arm's length in order to really get a sense of what's going on. And talking about this idea of cancel culture or of pushing people out of a group or ostracizing, exiling, what we saw during these modern day witch hunts is that it was a very emotionally charged atmosphere. Everything was very loaded. And for the most part, people were reacting from a place of emotional triggers. Most of them were very old emotional triggers that many people have held on to for years. We see how that was very detrimental because it is hard to make change. It's hard to get independence and liberation when our emotions are running the show. It makes more sense when we employ our logic and we are trying to make change from a place that is more grounded in nature. Remember that as you're navigating through Aquarius season, looking at these ideas of being a part of and being outside of, and trying your best to emotionally detach. The very best leaders are not emotionally charged people. They are people that can take all of the facts and take into account the tender emotions that can be involved in changes. Effective leaders remain composed. They consider emotions without getting swayed by them. They prioritize listening and they do thorough research. And all of those things are necessary when really embodying the powerful part of the Aquarius archetype.